you the written word in a digital world. My name is Nicole Hernandez, and I'm the Marketing and PR Coordinator for the Aspen Writers Foundation. As someone that works with new media and digital communication, I'm really excited about this event. I'm also pleased to introduce this afternoon's moderator. He's a good friend and supporter of the Writers Foundation. He's been the managing editor of Aspen Sojourner since 2005, and the magazine has been a finalist for the Western Publishing Association's Maggie Award each of the 5 years under his tenure, and has won the award twice, including in 2010. From 1995 to 2001, he was a staff editor at Skiing Magazine, where he held titles of New Products Editor and Senior Travel Editor. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Michael Miracle.
Thank you. I want to start by sort of acknowledging the nebulous nature of this topic. I don't think that we're going to be able to really put a fine point on how the written word has been reshaped in the digital age. I think it's expanding. And as I just said to Daniel, everything that I love about writing exists online. It's all there. So it's not a death knell for the written word yet, and hopefully it won't be. So I doubt we're going to speak with any speak to any real conclusions about this. It's more likely going to be a dialogue about how each of us are using the internet and where we see it taking us individually. So let me introduce my fellow panelists here. To my left, my immediate left, is Daniel Weinschenker. Did I say that correctly?
You did.
Thanks. Daniel works for digital storytelling. I'm interested in hearing his story because he has a master's in creative writing from University of Boulder, University of Colorado Boulder, and he has transitioned into an entirely new form of media, which for sort of dinosaurs like me who are exclusively married to print, it's going to be an interesting story to hear. And to
my hand cramps up when I hold a pencil, though. You all should know that. There is fallout.
And to his left is Danny Tameez. And Danny's story is sort of a classically Aspen tale. He came here in 2002 to ski bum, and he's still here. He's a new media entrepreneur. He has a website, Scully Aspen, which is a digital magazine that incorporates all sorts of new media, Twitter, journalism, etc. So I will start by saying, just to go back to the point I made initially, that I think this is an expansive time for writing. It is not we're not being confined, and why don't you go ahead and speak first?
Well, I would agree with that. I think I don't envision the work that we're doing at the Center for Digital Storytelling as replacing other genres and media forms that are already out there. It's just an addition to. But it is important to me for a number of reasons, and one has to do with literacy. And there's a lot of people that talk about media literacy out there, and for me, it's not media literacy. It's just literacy. When the printing press came along, or when books came along, I don't think it was talked about as book literacy. It's just yet another language that people need to learn. What's interesting is how slow people have been to be able to adopt this language compared to how long it's been out there for us to be consumers of. So primarily if you're talking about screen media, for some reason, most of us know how to listen and we know how to talk. And most of us know how to read, and most of us also know how to write. But for some strange reason, if you're talking about the entire world, or even just in this country, if you ask people how many people are consumers of screen media, whether it's movies or television, and most people raise their hands. On some level, they're consumers of screen media. And I don't know what the average is these days, but average television watching is up, I don't know, I think it's somewhere scarily between 5 to 8 hours a day across the board in this country. And then you ask how many people make TV or make screen media, it's a very, 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 very small percentage. And even if you take a look at something like YouTube, which is not a dinosaur yet, but if you take a look at something like YouTube, it's less than 1% of the people that watch content on YouTube actually post something on YouTube. So the chasm between consumer and producer is still very, very large. What we decided to do 17 years ago as a nonprofit was to try and help people change that. So 17 years ago becomes an important moment because 1993 was the year when Apple came out with QuickTime 1.0, Adobe came out with Premiere 1.0, and all of a sudden, for the first time in the history of screen language and screen media, there was an ability to edit on a personal computer. To the point where it is these days where pretty much everyone, at least in this country and in many other countries, has access to a computer that can edit video. And then in whatever, 2000, when did Al Gore invent the internet? I don't remember. But sometime in the 90s when the internet came along, not only were more or less most people in the country able to edit video, but they were able to self-publish on the internet. And that becomes a huge changing point in turning consumers into producers of media. So for us, it's, as a nonprofit, the Center for Digital Storytelling is actually, we're not a technology nonprofit, we're a social justice nonprofit, because we believe that this is an issue of democracy for people to be able to speak back in the language in which they're being spoken to in. So I don't know if you want me to show a piece.
Yeah, that would be great.
One of the things is that I brought a piece because a lot of people don't understand what this specific, what our specific work is about. Of course, you can teach people to use these tool sets to do a number of different things, from making movies to doing documentary to doing animations to whatever. But because of our social justice roots, we're primarily concerned and focus on first-person storytelling, all nonfiction, and all 3 minutes long. Because we train people in the tool sets in our workshop to be able to understand how to edit video, it's a writing process first where people come in with a story from their life. Could be them in relationship to some other person, some other place, some other time, some event. But usually it has the notion that they're telling the story and that they bring something as witness to this story is vital to the work that we do. So people come in, it's a written process. We teach them video editing software within the workshop, which actually we've been doing downstairs for the past 4 days, and we have a bunch of digital storytellers here walking around the building who have just completed their first workshop and their first pieces. That'll be screened tonight at the Belly Up. But at the end of these usually 3, or in this case 4-day workshops, people leave with a finished piece that's around 3 minutes long. That is their voice, usually their pictures, and sometimes music, and sometimes video is in that mix too. So I thought it might make sense to watch a 3-minute piece on the screens here, and then we can talk more about it.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Does that make sense?
Cue the video.
It starts off on a black screen for about the first 30 seconds, just so you know. See it up there.
I'd studied with when I was in the 8th grade was David Duke. Many years later, he became the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. I'm a 53-year-old lesbian, and I'm trying to understand how our paths crossed. I knew David because we went to the same school, started by the Carrollton Avenue Church of Christ, where my father became a minister. My family has always had a relationship with white supremacy, but these weren't the family stories we shared at holiday dinners. Most of this history had been lost or conveniently forgotten. In Brookhaven, Mississippi, I found my great-grandfather's journals from the early 20th century in his abandoned farmhouse. He was a dairy farmer, but he loved to read and write about natural history, farming, astronomy, mythology, religion. But much of his writing was racist. He believed in eugenics. In his house, I found a copy of The Klansman by Thomas Dixon. This is the book The Birth of the Nation was based on. The inside cover was inscribed, "We enjoyed it very much." I took the journals with me and did not tell anyone. I found a letter from another great-grandfather in which he described attending a huge march of the Ku Klux Klan in Washington, D.C. in 1925. The Klan paid his way because he was a Baptist preacher. He wrote to my grandfather that the Klan had given him the truth of his life. I took that letter too. I've taken lots of things. I guess it's evidence of an alternate family history, not a real family history. Somewhere along this journey, I attended a Wednesday night service at our old church. It's now an integrated inner-city church. I met the current minister and some of the members there. I met Mrs. Green. She has a praline business. I ordered a box of her pralines and sent them to my dad.
You can believe, trust, and know. You shall reap just what you sow.
There you go.
That was wonderful.
Great.
I'm curious to know if you have even a rough idea of how many words there were in that presentation. I tend to think in word counts because I'm a print person, and I'm just trying to imagine how much how many pages of the magazine that might have filled, that very powerful piece of storytelling.
Probably about 300 words in that piece, so half a page of writing.
Yeah, that's remarkable. I can just show you really quickly what that would probably be.
Probably that.
Yeah, it's about that many words, which is about a third of a page of writing in the magazine. And I can tell you that that bit of storytelling was significantly more powerful than what you see here on this page. So it's
maybe. There are sometimes things that, if it's a good digital story, I would say there are things that a picture is doing that someone can't do in words, hopefully. Or there's something that a soundtrack does that someone can't do in words. And coming from a writing background myself, I had to learn how to cut things out of my writing in order to leave room for other types of media. So that's usually the hardest thing for people coming into the workshops that are used to writing and not used to making what really is fairly complex, multimodal composition.
And on the subject of brevity, Danny, your site has a lot of shorter content, but you have a mix. You have some longer pieces. You pointed me today to a longer piece about the Aspen Brewing Company, which is a new business here in Aspen, our only brewery in town. Do you have a sense as to what people tend to read more? Do people gravitate to the short stuff more among what you do?
I do think on the web people tend to stick to shorter pieces. So if it's too long, if a written piece is too long, they don't really have the time or spend the time to read the entire thing. If a video is too long, they're not going to watch a 10-minute video. They want to watch a video that's a minute or a minute and a half and move on to the next one and get the information that they're looking for. So it is a different medium, and I think when people are looking for different things when they Google and search for something online than when they pick up a magazine and want to sit down and on their beach chair or at home and read a full article.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And how was the 3-minute time limit come to?
That's a good question. Part of it had to do with we wanted to run workshops that people would actually come and attend. And so we kind of settled on 3-day workshops, 3 8-hour days. First day dedicated to not touching the computers at all, but just trying to help people find their stories and try and script those stories or write them into and share them with the group in such a way that they could start distilling them down into what become stories about moments, as this one, or one or 2 or 3 maybe moments, but oftentimes one. With some context around it. So maybe the moment in the pralines piece that you just saw is the moment where she buys the pralines. Or maybe it's the moment that she discovers the journals in the house. But very specific moments. And so in a 3-day workshop, second day, people record their voices and learn the software. And day 3, they actually put the piece together themselves. So all the pieces that you would see from this work, they're all edited. Every decision that's being made is being made by the owner of the story. And the owner of the story, that's something that you don't get in other media oftentimes. You have editors that decide that. So the 300 words, 3 minutes is, what can we get people to finish in 3 days while we still need to teach them software and still need to record their voices and still need to help them edit their story? But then, of course, there's also great value in the distillation process for people. As Mark Twain said, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time. So people usually come in with 10,000 words, and the process of going from 10,000 or 1,000 or 2,000 down to 300 or 250 is not just about cutting. It's about how can I show the story without telling people the story?
And to what degree do they shape the narrative around the images that they have? Whereas if it were just a written piece, there are no or less confines there. Do they tend to try to write toward their images?
No, because that results in a captioning. So most of the time we get people to leave their images alone and focus on the voiceover. And just tell the story, and we will help them find some creative way of showing, of capturing people's visual attention. Although I would say that these pieces work brilliantly a lot of the time just as audio. So a lot of these pieces are played on Colorado Public Radio. I don't know if you've heard them, but on Colorado Matters, they'll play these pieces from specific groups of people that we work with, whether it's women in prison or survivors of rape and sexual assault or youth in foster care, et cetera, et cetera. We do work with very specific groups to help them make these stories.
The one that I saw on your website that I thought was kind of relevant and really interesting was about a journalist who was working for the Rocky Mountain News in Denver.
Yeah.
And it was about him getting laid off and his father dying. And I think if you want to go to his website and watch it, it's a good one.
Yeah, his father had passed away right at the time when he was getting laid off from the Rocky, when the Rocky was in fact shutting its doors. So
I want to ask the audience here just real quick, how many people here, to one degree or another, are trying to make a living as a writer? And how many of you have published work online? And how many of you were paid for that?
2.
1, 2.
We want to talk with you two.
Yeah, they'll set you straight soon enough. It's one of the things I want to talk about too. Is just in terms of the professional side of this, and Daniel and I talked a little bit about this kind of offline before. Is the point? One of the points he made earlier was that the internet has really democratized publishing. Anyone with a computer or access to one can produce something and put it out there for someone to find online. And as he also said to me, that there's a problem with what that does to quality. Many journalists think that degrades quality. And so I'd like for us to talk just a little bit now about how we can try to maintain quality in the digital world, because I think we all believe in and are supportive of the democratic aspects of what the internet has done to publishing, but we also care for the written word. We want to see it maintain a high level wherever possible. And Danny, I'll let you start. Okay. Just in what you do, how much editing do you do to the writers who submit work to you? And can anyone submit something and publish it?
Anybody can submit it. That doesn't mean that I'm going to publish it.
Mm-hmm.
You do want to keep a certain level of quality in the work that's online. If I publish something that's terrible, and you come to my site and that's the first piece you read, you're probably never going to come back. And that is the problem. Is anybody can start a blog. Anybody can go to WordPress or Blogger on Google and start their own blog and start typing. And people are afraid that this is saturating what is online and it's going to be too difficult to find what you're looking for. But really, the audience will decide. So, if I continually publish quality work on my website, people will begin to recognize that, and people will come back to the site, and my traffic will build. And eventually, if you get enough traffic, then you can monetize your website. Whereas, if you're publishing a blog that nobody's going to, then you're really just spinning your wheels, and it's really just a hobby. It's not something that's going to be professional.
And how do people find your work, your organization's work?
That's a good question. Probably we're a nonprofit, so we don't have a marketing budget. So it's mostly word of mouth. Like if you ask me, why are we even up here in Aspen? It's because Dee Dee Moore on the board here took the workshop and she came back, and it's mostly people taking these pieces back and showing their friends or showing their family, and someone sees it and they say, "That's amazing. How'd you do that?" And so that's how most people find us. But, to be honest, at this point, digital storytelling, maybe a lot of people haven't heard of it, but there's a lot of people who have heard of it. It's really, really big in education worldwide. So it's built into 21st century standards and things like that. So in education, whether it's K-12 or higher ed, teachers are being trained up in this to allow their students to start speaking in this language and validating it instead of submitting research reports. They make stories, and instead of just doing a family tree on a piece of cardboard, they go off and interview their grandmother and actually tell a story about that, using some types of digital media. So a lot of people have heard about the genre. It's become its own genre form. That if you were to type in digital storytelling into Google, it's all it's just all over the place, and it's not us. A lot of it is us, but a lot of it is just people that came and took our workshops, went back to some organization, some school, some place, and started doing it. Which is, if we don't exist in 10 years, then we're a success.
And does it tend to exist within a similar time limit? Do the other digital storytelling productions tend to be 3 to 5 minutes?
They do. I would say the one thing that gets kind of changed is that in school, a lot of teachers don't feel comfortable doing first-person work with their students, nor do they have, and I don't blame them, nor do they have the adequate time to sit and listen to each one of their students with the type of ear that we get to do in our workshops over 3 8-hour days that we take with people. And when I do work with youth, the workshops are even longer, 6 weeks long, after-school projects, where I'll come in and work with youth, whether they're undocumented youth in Colorado, which we've done a number of workshops with, to youth in foster care, et cetera. So,
what's the most kind of genre-bending, genre-creating use of the digital storytelling you've seen? Do you ever see it sort of planted into a longer piece where you have a written kind of typical narrative-driven piece, and then suddenly you have a video, a 3-minute video in the middle of that, and then it goes back to the written word?
Yeah, so I think what's starting to happen as it enters journalism is not that it's replacing journalism, it's that there might be a journalist that writes a story about a certain group or a certain thing happening in a certain part of the country, and then those stories are then embedded into the online portion of that story. So you'll read the text article about the movement or whatever it is that's going on, and then you'll watch actual individual people's stories. And again, the difference is that these are unedited in the sense that they are edited, but they're only edited by the person that owns the story. I wouldn't say that we don't have influence as facilitators over the types of stories that people tell in the workshops. We do. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, the decision is theirs, as opposed to in a lot of journalism and in documentary, a documentarian is going in, leaving with 200 hours of video or audio, editing down to a 1-hour clip, and it's whatever story they want to tell, not the story necessarily that the person that they've now videoed would tell about themselves. And maybe they do a better job at it, but it wouldn't be the same.
I think I asked the question that's interesting to hear the answer that I was looking yesterday with someone at magazines on the new iPad, and it was it made me, I left that experience very optimistic because it made me realize that the format in which I produce a magazine can very easily translate to the web into a very similar experience. You're swiping pages. You can have 15 magazines that fit in your purse, and you can have a novel in there and a full-length movie as well. And I think your point from earlier that it's really about storytelling, I think that there's great potential here. If you Google Sports Illustrated iPad demo, it's really remarkable what magazines will be like on these tablets. You can have a very magazine-like experience in that you will flip through pages. You see an image, to use the example of Sports Illustrated, of two football players ramming into one another, and you tap that image and suddenly it goes to live video. The experience is just going to be much richer. What that means to the written word, I think it's too soon to definitively say, because for every death knell, I think that there is an equally positive bit of news. I watched an interview with David Remnick, the editor of The New Yorker, the other day, and he said that the stuff that's read online in The New Yorker tends to be the very longest of pieces, not the short ones, not the talk of the town stuff, not the more just the utility type stuff, movie listings, whatever the goings on in New York City. People tend to read the real long form stuff, and they have the data to back that up. So I think for someone like me, it is a bit frightening because it is such a genre redefining period that we're in. But I think ultimately it's going to be about storytelling, which for any writer is a positive. And I don't know the time, but I think we're probably at the juncture that we should open this up to questions from the audience. Are there any? Yes.
Just real quick, your websites. What are your websites?
The Center for Digital Storytelling is storycenter.org. You can watch some stories, although we're not a publishing house, and just for the same reasons I talked about before, we're not a publishing house for what are probably now 25,000 of those stories, just like the one that you saw. We don't co-opt other people's stories usually and then publish them ourselves, and we don't put ads. It's just not our thing. We're here to give literacy. If people want to publish them themselves, then they do on various websites. But we do have kind of a small sampling of stories from various different types of projects up there.
What are some, sorry, before you give the website,
Sure.
what are some of the websites that you know are publishing these stories?
We helped create a kind of a YouTube for digital stories, and that website is storiesforchange.net. And that's a place where people from our workshops, if they want to publish their story at the end of the workshop, they can self-upload it themselves. But we don't take their stories and publish them, usually.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, my website was aspen.scholarly.com, and that's SKOLLIE. And, what we did is basically bring together everything Aspen. So we aggregate news from the Daily News and Aspen Public Radio and some other local sources, and we mix that with social media, and we mix that with videos, whether they be produced by a specific company or they come from YouTube or Vimeo, and audio, photos, we kind of just bring it all together and use the power of what the web is to present that online.
And the website of our magazine is aspensojourner.com. Go ahead with them.
I was just going to ask about the fee to watch videos on Stories for Change and what kind of payment people are receiving to post their videos on that site.
There's no fee and there's no payment. It's like YouTube. People upload them if they want to upload them. But I would say that digital stories are kind of coming into their own now as digital essay. Some people call it digital essay, and some literary magazines are now starting to accept these as part of scholarship and publication. Definitely people, there are writers and people going for their PhDs who are turning in theses and dissertations that are actually made up of digital stories or essays.
Yeah, I have a question about the duration of a particular piece. You may have alluded to or specifically mentioned the fact that when it's filter feeding media where you just sit there passively and get what comes down the tube, it was tied into structures with advertising blocks of time. If it's freed of time completely, which it is in free selection media, what do you have? It seems to me most pieces are too long. If you start with a discipline of 3 minutes, how do you help people actually learn the proper size and dimensions for a story so it's told fully, not too much and not too little?
Me personally, how do we do that in our workshop?
Well, you're talking about video specifically, right?
No, I didn't mean to target it at
Right.
one person. I just meant to open up that particular topic.
Well, I think just generally speaking, it's knowing how to write and knowing how to tell a story. And in my role, I can help do that and or just simply do it, shorten a story and kind of speed the narrative along. And I think that's one of the things that could be fundamentally changing about publishing now is that there are just fewer and fewer editors. I can tell you that when I started at Skiing Magazine in 1995, we were 12 full-time editors, and that magazine is down to 4. So, and they're doing maybe not particularly in the last 2 years, not the same magazine size, but something fairly similar.
I think my answers are probably a little bit different because we're not concerned with making money off of these pieces, and putting ads on them. So my answers are different. But I would say that there are certainly plenty of times when people come into the workshops and want to tell a story, and it's a story that absolutely cannot be told in 3 minutes. And we're like, how about do a chapter here, and then because they're going to come away with the literacy and the tool set, then go do the rest of it on your own time at home. So I don't think that every story can be told in 3 minutes.
Did we answer your question? I'm not sure.
Well, you did in the sense that the editing process.
Mm-hmm. It seems that your experience has usually been as an editor to be able to help people shorten pieces, to make with more punch and less extraneous or unnecessary elaboration of the obvious or whatever it might be.
Yeah, that's true.
I think, the length of a piece should be appropriate to what you're presenting. So if you've ever been to a movie where that's 3 hours long and you think, wow, that should have been an hour and a half, that was obviously the director going one step too far. And, sometimes it should be shorter, sometimes it should be longer. It just depends.
I would say most of the time it's shorter. There's not very many of us that come out of a movie and say, it could have been longer. How many people say that? Not very often, so.
Please.
How much time do you spend with your candidates with regards to visual continuity and collage, montage? 3 minutes can be a really long time to sit there and absorb something if it's not on point. Have you ever had a candidate that would approach you and came in with a koan or a
With the what?
A koan, a very short. It's a Buddhist thing. It's a number of words put together in a certain continuity that allows one to reflect and think and respond to those words, to that continuity of words. Along with that, you would have a continuity of visuals. Now, my question simply is, first of all, have you had a candidate like that, and would you welcome a candidate like that? Because the thing I'm trying to get at is, what is journalism? And that's what you guys are talking about. It's a changing landscape of journalism. And is journalism more of a visual continuity in 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 30 seconds?
Right.
That means something that's very meaningful if those images are chosen and the continuity is chosen in a proper fashion?
I would say that most people that come into our workshops want to have an image for every noun in their story. And they feel like that's necessary, even though that's not the language that they see on TV. When it comes time to start speaking it, they think that that's what they have to do. And if they don't show a picture of the thing they're talking about, there's somehow their piece is broken. In fact, they can't even make it. And so oftentimes in our workshops, people will change their stories at the end during the middle of the first day, because that's what happens in group process. That's what happens when you watch these pieces. You may start thinking about your piece in a different way, but then they say, but I can't tell it because I didn't bring the pictures with me, because they're often traveling from great distances for these workshops, or because I don't have the picture, it burned up in my house or whatever. And we say, oh, perfect, now you can tell the story. Because, again, part of the language that we're teaching people is not just how to write. We're trying to talk to them about composition, and composition about multiple forms of narrative running concurrently. Though sometimes as many as 4 in these pieces. You have 1, text on screen, 2, voiceover, 3, imagery, visuals, whether it's video or pictures, moving pictures, whatever, it's visual, and then 4, soundtrack. And having those 4 run redundant to each other all the time usually kills a piece. So somehow people need to start thinking in ways where each part of the narrative is filling in a different part of the story. So I tell people, if the first part of your story, if the first paragraph is, I grew up in a red brick house with a white door and 2 evergreens to the left and right, and then you have a picture of that house, then you change that first sentence to say, I grew up here. Yeah. So instead of replicating what's in the picture, most of the writing prompts that I give people have to do with, tell me what you can't see in the picture. Because if a lot of these stories are about, as many stories are, crisis and return from crisis, who here has pictures of crisis? Everyone has a picture of their parents' marriage, but how many people here have a picture of their parents' divorce? Very few. So you have to start thinking creatively about how are you going to visually represent the things that you're talking about in your pieces.
The haiku form, for example, the Japanese poem, where, again, same type of thing, where very few words are spoken, but they're spoken in a continuity, in a stream that allows this reflection. And I'm just curious, it sounds to me like that's what you guys are pushing for, is to not only give light to the word, but also the possibility of the imagery, and not be redundant.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would say that we do, but it is, people usually start with written word that becomes then their oral story. Although usually one of their best writing prompts is to go through old pictures. Like the prompt is the picture, but then and even though they're thinking about that picture, they're not thinking about the layout of the pictures first. But when people do come into the workshop who want to think and want to lead a narrative visually, we totally welcome it. That's great if people want to do that. It's just harder, I think.
Hi, I have a question for all of you, but probably particularly for Danny. My question is, I'm looking up there and I see 3 men. Do you think that women are equally represented or well represented in this burgeoning field, creating something new?
Well, I think I've actually read it's a fact that on Twitter men tend to follow other men, but there's also plenty of women out there doing it too. So it's really it's really what you make of it. Like Michael was saying earlier, the barriers to entry are nothing. Anybody can go online, anybody can start a blog, anybody can start a Twitter account, or any of these social media things. And it's really how aggressive you want to be about it. Do you want to shoot a video every day and post it? There's a guy named Gary Vaynerchuk that wrote a book called Crush It. And it's basically about how he just pushed every day. Every day he's shooting a video. Every day he was on Twitter, self-promoting himself. So it's really, I don't think it's limited to women at all. It's how aggressive you want to be about it, and where you want to take it. It's up to you.
Do you have an opinion about that yourself?
I just want to hear what your experience is, what you've seen.
On the written side, I'd say our contributor base is fairly equally split between men and women. My personal history with publishing, I have worked for more women than I have men. Most of my direct superiors have been, in fact, all of my direct superiors have been women in my 15 years in publishing. So my personal experience, I don't know to what degree it speaks to the numbers at large, but I've had only female bosses.
In the digital age, I feel like it is kind of more, it might actually be geared more towards men because, when I was a kid, I had a Nintendo and I had a Sega and I was playing video games, and my sisters were not doing those things. And those skills that I learned actually translated over to what I'm doing now because it was techie and it was geeky, and I outgrew those toys and I started playing with computers and computer code, and now I'm involved very much with the web. So I think that has something to do with it. And the reason you probably don't see a woman up here now is because Aspen in general is still very behind in this whole revolution. So if you go to San Francisco or you go to Austin, Texas, where it's big, you're going to see, it's going to be a more diverse kind of participation. But in Aspen, there's really not that many people doing it. So the few that are, I feel, might be more men. Yeah.
Of the people that take our workshops, 80%, I would say 75 to 80% are women. And I'm one of 3 out of 16 full-time staff at the Center for Digital Storytelling, one of 3 men out of... So maybe it's just coincidence.
So, no, but because, I think that's interesting too, because what you're doing is digital storytelling, but to me it's also filmmaking. And I feel like filmmaking is something that's been around for much longer too, so it's kind of, had time to saturate.
Given the self-revelatory nature of most of the self-publishing that takes place with whether it's YouTube videos or blogs or things like that, and you're talking a lot about digital storytelling, which is also going to come from some personal perspective. What do you see the trends in journalism where you're having that sort of more democratic participation, but people that are not necessarily trained or schooled in traditional viewpoints of journalism? Do you see the trend happening where the new journalists are also intrusive into the story, into the reportage, and it's really about them and the story, or do you think that sort of tradition of some objectivity in reporting or bringing news or different aspects of news? What are your feelings on that?
That's a great question. I think that's one of the big unknowns that we're faced with. And I don't think it's necessarily exclusive to print or to the written word. I think, with the preponderance of talking heads in the news media, you see less reporting on television news now too. One of the reasons is that it's just cheaper. Opinion is a lot cheaper than reported fact, and it is free. And so I don't know the answer, but I think that is the big question. And I think that one thing that has to happen in order to prevent things from going the wrong way in terms of what you just described is that the digital content will have to be monetized somehow. That people have become accustomed to digital content being free. I think in 2011, the New York Times is going to start charging for online content. The Wall Street Journal already charges for much of its online content. People will have to come to terms with the fact that content can't be free. So someone has to pay for it, and sites like the Huffington Post and the Drudge Report that are aggregators will have to get their content elsewhere or go away.
Or advertising. But I mean, if you look at television, it's still free. It's advertising. It's not free, but it's, you got to watch ads. Or you don't.
Yes.
You mentioned that PBS will show some of these digital clips, and I was just wondering, you might already do this, but if you guys have a screening room at like Telluride Mountain Film and advertise that way to get funding and things like that, get the word out.
Yeah, that's a great idea. There is actually an entire digital storytelling department of PBS now that we help start. It's mostly for teachers and teachers doing project with youth in inner cities and then uploading the stories, let youth make those stories. So it's part of Teacher Line. What I did say, and one of our largest projects to date was with the BBC. It would have to be with the BBC, where BBC Wales actually, we trained them, a bunch of facilitators up in digital storytelling, and they went around with a mobile lab, and anyone with 5 days in the story to tell could come and tell their story in one of their workshops, and then they were broadcast on BBC as interstitials in news magazine programs, and then also all online. So they came up with quite a collection. Unfortunately, PBS has not done that here yet, but that's not a surprise. They run a little bit behind. They run a little bit behind BBC, where they get funded actually by public funding.
Sorry, Nicole. This woman here has been patiently waiting to ask a question.
Thank you so much. I was thinking that the digital storytelling is perfect for the poet who might want to translate a poem into that kind of medium, which would take away from the storytelling part and your purpose, the nonfiction, but it could be used as a tool to bring poetry to people because we work with a few choice words to begin with rather than having to cut it down, too. I also thought about how it addresses today's short attention span, which is good and a bittersweet kind of truth. As a librarian, I have a concern about archiving these digital stories, and also as just a concern about the marketing, because people put all their time and heart into it, and then if it goes away, nobody ever looks at it again. What's the true value of it? So my two questions are about, is there any movement to archive these? And the other one is, how do you deal with the copyright issues for the music? Do your participants make their own music, or what do you do?
Right. So primarily when we started, remember, there was no web. In fact, there was no publication of these whatsoever, and so we didn't really care. We said, use whatever you want to use. You're going to bring it home. And that also talks to one of the other questions that you had, which was, what was it? It was something really good, though. But it had to do, I think it had to do with like archiving and, if these don't get watched, I would say that don't put too great of an emphasis on the publication of these pieces. Part of the great value of this work is for the individual that makes it. And that's what we're mostly concerned with, and sometimes organizations that want to hire us aren't. They're concerned with getting the product at the end, and that's usually why we don't work with them. But that's our choice as a nonprofit.
As long as you don't charge anyone for the digital story.
Right.
It's okay.
Yeah. Well, so we archive it. It's not okay. It's still a violation of copyright. But
go ahead and speak. I'll repeat what you say.
Actually, it brings up the larger issue of IP in general, intellectual property rights, and protection of the creation of a creator and how that plays itself out. For instance, I don't believe anybody has the right to appropriate somebody else's creative work for anything. I mean, if it's music, you can't just take it and use it to, make your story come to music. It all has to do with respect between human beings for the intellectual process. It also has to do with the fact that people now are indeed able to create their own content. Music you can do, there's all kinds of ways that you can do music. You don't have to be Stravinsky. But I think the intellectual property rights issue might be something to take a look at because it's so easy to violate now.
I would agree, which is why when organizations now that there's the web and people are wanting to publish these pieces, instead of just take them home, we tell them they need to be concerned with that. And so we direct them to websites where they can download license-free music if they want to use music, or we ask them to play their own music. Or if they have no intention on publishing it at all, this is a different discussion. I don't have a problem with them using music to take back to their house and have on their bookshelf. Just as I wouldn't have a problem with you making a mixtape of from the CDs that you have.
I wouldn't have a problem with somebody using my work without my permission.
And I think it seems though that the rules are radically different for the web. Making a mixtape is one thing, but you wouldn't expect someone to make a movie.
That's right.
and not pay royalties for the use of a song. And I'm curious, just while we're on this topic, Danny, just broadly how you feel about the aggregating side of your website. Do you think that you're pushing traffic to the newspapers and the other organization whose content you link? Essentially part of your site is built on other people's work, right?
Yes, and basically if let's say I link back to the Daily News, I'm not taking their whole story and publishing it on my site. That would be, that would be an issue. What I do is I would take the headline and write a blurb, and if people are interested in that, they can click on it and go straight to the Daily News website. So essentially what I'm doing is sending business to them and giving them more hits on their website, which is what they're looking for.
But I could easily just say that if someone put the first 10 seconds of a song in one of their digital stories, that someone could go and then it would give the artist more traffic, that someone might want to hear the rest of the song.
And YouTube does that, I think, right? YouTube now, the ads by Google, you get a little sort of ghost window that pops up on the bottom of the video that says, buy this song from iTunes.
That's right.
I think it varies from medium to medium. It can be different from music. It can be different from news. If I create a video for my website, what I'm doing with it is I'm putting it as many places as I can. So I'm putting it on YouTube, I'm putting it on Vimeo, and I make that video embeddable. So I want you to take it and put it on your website, and so other people can see it, because then they see my logo and they hear more about what I'm doing, and essentially sharing is really a major part of Web 2.0. And if you're publishing content, you should be wanting your content as many places as it can possibly be. If you keep it locked down to your own little website, nobody's ever going to see it. You want it to spread.
Yeah, I've digitally published 3 novels, self-supported, doing digital media for 17 years, largely through philanthropy and patronage, thousands of pages of factual text. What I found, as an extensively copyrighted writer, is I look forward to people who steal parts of my work. I have an extremely resourceful lawyer. It's a very lucrative way to do it. The problem is that after 17 years and now, invitational author to the Confluence, Desert Writers Seminar, and all this stuff, I'm really bored. And I'm getting real tired of the offers for really shallow sex from women who are obviously after my wealth and image, and was wondering how much trouble you're having in the industry with people in that position, and what you would recommend us doing about it. Thank you.
What was the question?
Well, I got lost in shallow sex.
Yeah, I can tell you that...
The question regards copyright and other personal violations.
With what we run in the print magazine, we receive requests all the time from businesses who've been written about all sorts of people asking to reproduce the work, and we put them directly in contact with the writer because we've paid for the one-time use of the story. We say that they're free to negotiate directly with the writer or photographer to reproduce the work after the shelf life of the issue has expired, which is 3 months. We're quarterly. So we act as our writers and photographers' agents. We don't pay a lot of money, and we feel like we owe them that.
I think we have time for one more question.
Here, this woman here in the blue shirt has been patiently waiting for a question.
Daniel, I just wanted to ask you if any of your digital storytelling is in cartoon form.
Every so often. Actually, I wouldn't say cartoon form, although there are a couple that way, because it's another software issue, actually. But a lot of people draw pictures for their stories, especially if they don't, because you have issues of disclosure, especially when you're working with survivors of rape and sexual assault, victims of abuse who are underage, etc. We're pretty ethical about the type of work that we do with people and around disclosure. And so either people will draw pictures for those types of works or people's faces are blurred out. Mm-hmm. Good question, though.
Sure, one more question?
I was just going to ask a short one.
Sure.
In reference to the term spread, how do these creative people with a continually diluting marketplace monetize spread?
Monetize spread? Well, if they create a big enough brand, let's say it's an author, if they create a big enough brand and name for themselves and their work is noticed in enough places, then what they start doing is then they self-publish their book maybe, or they find a publisher and suddenly they're making money off of their work because somebody found them through all of this, through this sharing that they did do. Does that make sense?
It does, but the pond is getting more full, and the model keeps changing at such a pace that it's hard for us as creative individuals to keep track of what is the best process to go. Keep it exclusive, keep it kind of tied down to offer it up to someone you're targeting directly at.
Sure.
Spread it out.
The cream will rise to the top. So if your work is that great, people will find it. If it's not, then it's nobody's going to share it. If it's good, it'll be shared and you'll be discovered, and hopefully you can monetize something.
I think Nicole is indicating that we're out of time, but I'm for one, I'm happy to mill around and answer any questions that I might be able to outside of this room, and just want to thank you all for being here with us and listening to us.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you again.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.